United States and Iran traded strikes last night for the 12th straight night as the two sides continue to ramp up both the fighting and the rhetoric. The president yesterday reiterated his threat to target civilian infrastructure in Iran, which would likely amount to a war crime if realized. Trump warned on Truth Social that anytime Iran, quote, shoots at a ship in the Strait of Hormuz, then the U.S. will bomb and destroy one bridge or power plant, even in or near the capital of Tehran. Iran's foreign minister responded to Trump's threat, writing, "Our defense doctrine is clear, eye for an eye. Any aggression against Iran, including our infrastructure, will compel a powerful and decisive response." Meanwhile, the fighting is continuing, with the U.S. military saying its strikes are centered on degrading Iran's ability to threaten shipping in the Strait, despite the president making this claim yesterday at a rally in Georgia.
If you combine us and Venezuela, we have about 62% of the world's oil market. So we don't need straits. We don't need anything. We don't need the Hormuz Strait, but we do it because we have to do it, because we cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon.
Kathy, let's fact check the president. We've been doing a lot of that this morning. We do need, the global economy needs the Strait of Hormuz. Now, there are efforts underway to reduce, the energy sector's reliance on the Strait of Hormuz, but alternatives constructed in the region could be years in the making. Right now, the Strait of Hormuz is an absolutely vital waterway, and Iran has proven they can kind of open and close it at will. And that is, at least for now, one of the legacies of this conflict. That waterway was open to all back in February, and now it is under Tehran's thumb.
Yeah, negotiations are about two big things, remember. They're about Iran's nuclear programs, and they are now about the Strait of Hormuz, which they weren't before because the Strait of Hormuz is open. Add to that, we now have threats against the Red Sea as well, which is another area of transport for both energy and other supplies going out through the Suez Canal. So that's now under attack as well. But when it comes to the mounting toll of the war, a new count compiled by an independent conflict monitor and shared with MS Now documents 21 strikes on bridges, railways and water facilities across Iran in July, although U.S. officials deny targeting civilian sites intentionally. For more, let's bring in MS Now White House reporter Akayla Gardner. Akayla, thanks very much for joining us here. This has been something that Donald Trump keeps threatening. Yeah. It borders into the area of war crimes if he goes after civilian sites. What do we actually know about what the White House is doing in this area?
Something that I have spent a lot of time thinking about is in January, President Trump promised the Iranian people to come to their rescue. On the first day of the strikes of this war, he said that the U.S. was coming to help the Iranian people. And now we have consistently seen him basically threaten to destroy their entire civilization. He's talked about bombing them back to the Stone Ages, back to oblivion. And now he repeatedly talks about targeting civilian infrastructure. And what this data shows, and I want to say this independent monitor, it's one of the most respected monitors in the world. It's frequently cited by the UN and the World Bank. It shows that there have been strikes on civilian infrastructure. And as we mentioned, it's bridges, it's water facilities, it's railways. I spoke to one Iranian American who has family along the coast of the Strait of Hormuz who says her family cannot evacuate if needed because all of the major roads and bridges are destroyed. So these are having real impacts. There's also a report that there was a drinking water system that potentially cut off supplies to thousands of people and 20 villages. And the administration has not been transparent. They dispute at least one of these incidents that ACLED is talking about here, but they have not been transparent about what exactly is happening.
Akayla, does the administration, how do they deal with the question of whether or not this is in fact a war crime? That they're going after civilian targets that are not legitimate targets.
Yeah, a U.S. official told us that they do not target these places intentionally, but what administration officials have argued is that some of these targets are dual-use targets, so they're used by both the military and civilians. But when you're talking about targets that have to do with food or agriculture or water, it's very difficult to make that argument that there's an overwhelming need for these places to be struck. And it raises questions about whether we're being precise in our strikes.
Okay, Kayla, thank you very much for joining us. And of course, John, as you know, we look at water facilities in particular. that is a big issue, because if they were to strike back against, if the Iranians were to decide to strike back against water facilities in the Gulf region, that would be huge as well. And that reporting, of course, available to read online now. Kayla Gardner, thank you very much.
Yeah, no, and this also shows, as I wrote earlier this week for The Atlantic, just the bind that the president is in, that if he were to escalate here, and including, first of all, potentially venturing into the area of war crimes, Iran would retaliate in the region and in potentially devastating fashion. We have shown, even this week, they're able to strike and kill American soldiers at an American base. But if he cuts and runs now, which more and more Republicans, frankly, are quietly urging him to do, just abandon this, try to salvage, in their estimation, the GOP's chances this November, then he leaves an untenable situation there in the Middle East, with Iran, in control of the Strait of Hormuz, and the hardliners emboldened and confident that they can inflict pain on the global economy. He's in a real conundrum, and it's because of a war of his own choosing has not gone nearly as well as he thought it would. Well,